Colonel Marcus Thompson wasn't just walking through Denver Airport that day to catch a flight. But when airport security questioned his uniform, 200 soldiers witnessed something that would become the most respectful moment in aviation history. Colonel Marcus Thompson walked through the bustling corridors of Denver International Airport with the unmistakable bearing and confident stride of a career military officer who had spent 3 decades serving his country with distinction and honor across multiple continents during some of the most challenging conflicts in modern American military history. At 55 years old, he carried himself with the quiet dignity and unshakable composure that comes from leading men and women through life-and-death situations in hostile territories where split-second decisions determined whether everyone made it home safely to their families waiting anxiously for their return. His Air Force dress blue uniform was immaculate and perfectly pressed, with every ribbon, medal, and insignia positioned with military precision according to strict regulations he had memorized decades ago during his initial officer training at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where he had graduated with highest honors despite facing racial barriers that would have discouraged lesser men from pursuing their dreams of military service. The silver eagles on his shoulders gleamed under the bright airport fluorescent lighting, marking him unmistakably as a full colonel with the authority and responsibility that came with commanding thousands of airmen and managing multi-million-dollar aircraft operations at military installations around the world where American interests needed protection and defense. Today marked a particularly meaningful milestone in his distinguished career as he was traveling to Washington, D.C. for his official retirement ceremony at the Pentagon, where he would be honored alongside other distinguished officers who had dedicated their lives to protecting American freedom and democratic values that he held sacred above all else. His chest displayed an impressive array of ribbons and decorations that told the story of a warrior who had earned respect through courage, leadership, and unwavering dedication to duty that had taken him from junior officer assignments to commanding major air operations in multiple theaters of conflict, where his tactical brilliance and inspirational leadership had saved countless lives. Officer Bradley Morrison, a young white airport security guard in his mid-20s, who had only been working at the airport for 6 months and had never served in any branch of the military himself, immediately noticed Marcus walking through the terminal and felt something was wrong with the situation unfolding before his inexperienced eyes. Bradley had grown up in a small rural town where diversity was limited, and his understanding of military service came primarily from action movies and television shows, rather than real-world experience with actual service members who had dedicated their lives to protecting his freedom. His suspicious gaze followed Marcus through the crowded terminal, his prejudiced assumptions and limited worldview leading him to believe that something about this particular situation required immediate investigation and intervention from airport security personnel who were trained to identify potential threats and suspicious activity. Bradley quickly radioed for backup support from his supervisor and fellow security officers, his voice carrying unmistakable urgency and concern as he described what he incorrectly perceived as a potentially dangerous situation requiring immediate attention and professional intervention from experienced security personnel. "We've got a suspicious individual in military uniform near gate B-15, he reported with the self-importance of someone who believed he was protecting innocent travelers from a serious threat to their safety and security. "Something doesn't look right about this situation, and I think we need to investigate immediately before it becomes a bigger problem." Within minutes, 3 additional security officers had arrived at the scene, surrounding Marcus with the aggressive posture and intimidating presence typically reserved for handling genuine security threats, rather than a distinguished military officer traveling peacefully through the airport on official business. Senior Officer Janet Williams, a stern-faced woman in her 40s with 20 years of security experience who should have known better than to make assumptions based on appearance alone, took charge of the situation with the authoritative demeanor of someone accustomed to wielding power over travelers who had no choice but to comply with her demands and requests. "Sir, we're going to need you to stop right there and answer some questions about your uniform and identification," she announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear and turn their attention toward the unfolding confrontation that was about to escalate far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the security team with the patient composure of someone who had unfortunately encountered this type of discrimination before throughout his military career, though he remained disappointed that such prejudice still existed in places where it should have been eliminated years ago through education and proper training. "Is there a specific problem, officers?" he asked with the respectful tone and professional courtesy that had been drilled into him during decades of military service, where proper protocol and chain of command were sacred principles that governed every interaction between personnel regardless of their personal feelings or opinions. Bradley stepped forward aggressively, his hand hovering near his radio as if preparing for some kind of emergency situation that existed only in his imagination rather than reality. "We have reports of suspicious activity involving someone wearing a military uniform who doesn't belong here," he lied boldly, his accusation hanging in the air like a challenge to Marcus's integrity and right to wear the uniform he had earned through years of dedicated service and personal sacrifice for his country. "We're going to need to see multiple forms of identification and verify that this uniform is legitimate and not stolen property being used for fraudulent purposes." Marcus reached slowly and deliberately into his jacket pocket, his movements careful and measured to avoid giving these nervous security officers any excuse to escalate an already tense situation that was being observed by dozens of curious passengers who had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold in the busy terminal area. "Certainly, officers," he replied with the calm professionalism that had served him well during countless high-pressure situations throughout his distinguished military career, where keeping a cool head often meant the difference between success and failure in critical missions. "I have my military identification, driver's license, and retirement orders right here for your examination and verification." He handed over his credentials with the patient dignity of someone who understood that sometimes you had to endure ignorance and prejudice to eventually reach a better understanding, though he couldn't help but notice the growing crowd of onlookers who were witnessing this embarrassing display of discrimination against a decorated war veteran. Bradley snatched the identification cards from Marcus's hands with obvious hostility and suspicion, examining them as if he were a trained expert in detecting fraudulent military documents, despite having no knowledge whatsoever about proper military identification procedures or protocols. "These could easily be fake," he announced loudly to his colleagues, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled crowd of passengers who were beginning to murmur among themselves about the obvious unfairness of the situation they were witnessing. "Anyone can get fake military IDs made these days, and we've had problems with people impersonating service members for various illegal purposes and fraudulent activities." Officer Williams took the documents and spent several minutes examining them with exaggerated scrutiny, clearly looking for any excuse to justify their aggressive treatment of a distinguished officer who deserved far better treatment than what he was receiving from people who should have been grateful for his service to their country. "Sir, we're going to need you to explain exactly why you're wearing this uniform and where you're traveling today," she demanded, with the authoritative tone of someone who believed she had the right to interrogate a decorated military officer about his official business and travel arrangements. Marcus glanced around at the growing crowd of passengers who were watching this scene with various expressions of confusion, concern, and growing indignation as they began to realize that something was fundamentally wrong with how this situation was being handled by airport security personnel. Among the onlookers, he noticed several individuals wearing military clothing and insignia, including a young army sergeant who was staring at Marcus's ribbon rack with obvious recognition and growing anger at the disrespectful treatment being displayed toward a senior officer who clearly outranked everyone in the immediate vicinity. As word of the confrontation spread through the crowded terminal via social media posts and text messages from concerned witnesses, more and more military personnel who were traveling through Denver International Airport began converging on the scene to observe what was happening to their fellow service member. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a career Navy veteran with 25 years of distinguished service who immediately recognized Marcus's impressive collection of combat ribbons and decorations, pushed through the crowd with barely controlled anger written across his weathered face. "What exactly is going on here?" he demanded forcefully, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades leading men and women in challenging situations where respect and proper protocol were essential elements of military discipline and professional conduct. This officer's uniform and decorations indicate extensive combat service and senior leadership positions that demand respect from anyone with basic knowledge of military customs and traditions. Bradley turned toward the growing crowd of military personnel with obvious annoyance and frustration that his authority was being questioned by people who clearly understood military protocols far better than he did. "This is a security matter that doesn't concern you, so please step back and let us handle this situation according to our established procedures," he said dismissively, completely unaware that his condescending attitude was only making the situation worse and further angering the assembled service members who were witnessing this disrespectful treatment of a senior officer. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Peterson, an Air Force pilot who immediately recognized Marcus from their previous service together at various military installations, stepped forward with her own military identification clearly visible and her voice carrying unmistakable authority that demanded immediate attention from everyone present. "Officer, you are currently detaining Colonel Marcus Thompson, one of the most respected and decorated officers in the United States Air Force," she announced clearly and loudly enough for everyone in the immediate area to hear her important revelation. His service record includes multiple combat deployments, command of major air operations, and decorations for valor that most military personnel only dream of achieving during their entire careers. The crowd of military personnel began murmuring among themselves as they studied Marcus's ribbon rack more carefully, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration and then to outright anger at the disrespectful treatment he was receiving from security officers who clearly had no understanding of military customs, traditions, or the proper respect due to senior officers who had dedicated their lives to serving their country with distinction and honor. Within 15 minutes of the initial confrontation, word had spread throughout the entire airport terminal through military communication networks and social media platforms, drawing active duty service members, veterans, and retired personnel from every gate, restaurant, and waiting area to witness what was becoming an unprecedented display of solidarity and respect for a fellow warrior who was being unjustly treated by civilian security personnel. Sergeant Major Williams, a distinguished Army veteran with 30 years of service, who had served alongside Marcus during Operation Desert Storm, arrived at the scene with a group of fellow veterans who immediately formed a protective circle around their embattled colleague. "Colonel Thompson," he said with deep respect and obvious pride, "it's an honor to see you again, sir. Your leadership during the Kuwait operation saved hundreds of lives and earned the respect of every soldier who served under your command during those dangerous and challenging days." More and more service members continued arriving as news of the confrontation spread through military channels and veteran networks, each bringing their own stories of Marcus's exceptional leadership, tactical brilliance, and unwavering dedication to the welfare of the men and women under his command throughout his distinguished career. Captain Rodriguez shared how Marcus had personally recommended him for promotion and helped him navigate career challenges that could have ended his military service prematurely. While Master Chief Peterson described how Marcus's innovative training programs had revolutionized air combat tactics and saved countless lives during subsequent operations in hostile territories around the world. The growing crowd of military personnel created an increasingly tense atmosphere as their anger toward the security officers intensified with each passing minute, though their discipline and respect for proper military conduct prevented them from taking any action that might compromise Marcus's dignity or create additional problems for a situation that was already spiraling out of control. Airport management began receiving numerous complaints and reports about the discriminatory treatment being displayed toward a distinguished military officer, with several passengers threatening to file formal complaints with federal authorities if the situation wasn't resolved immediately and appropriately, with proper respect for someone who had dedicated his life to protecting American freedom and democratic values. Bradley and his fellow security officers found themselves increasingly isolated and outnumbered as more military personnel arrived to support their respected colleague. Though their stubborn pride and inability to admit their mistake prevented them from backing down gracefully and apologizing for their obvious error in judgment and professional conduct. As the crowd of military supporters continued growing beyond what anyone could have anticipated, stories began emerging about Marcus's legendary service record and the numerous ways he had positively impacted the lives and careers of countless service members throughout his 3 decades of distinguished military leadership in peacetime and combat situations. Staff Sergeant Martinez, now retired but still carrying himself with military bearing and pride, tearfully described how Marcus had personally visited him in a military hospital after he was wounded in combat, spending hours providing encouragement and ensuring that his family received proper support during the long and difficult recovery process that followed his injuries. Colonel Thompson didn't just command from behind a desk, Martinez explained to the assembled crowd with obvious emotion and deep gratitude. He led from the front lines, shared our dangers and hardships, and never asked any of us to do something he wouldn't do himself in the same situation. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson added his own testimony about Marcus's innovative approach to pilot training that had revolutionized air combat effectiveness and significantly reduced casualty rates among aircrew members who benefited from his tactical expertise and commitment to thorough preparation for dangerous missions in hostile environments. His training programs became the standard throughout the Air Force because they worked, Jackson explained with professional admiration. Pilots who learned under his system had higher survival rates and mission success rates than any other training program in military history. The security officers watched with growing unease as more and more military personnel shared similar stories of respect, admiration, and personal gratitude toward Marcus, making it increasingly clear that they had made a serious mistake in judgment that was about to have significant consequences for their careers and professional reputations. Airport executives began arriving on the scene as reports of the confrontation reached upper management levels, their expressions showing obvious concern about the potential public relations disaster that was unfolding in their facility and the possible legal ramifications of discriminatory treatment toward a distinguished military officer who deserved far better treatment than what he was receiving. Media representatives and social media influencers began documenting the scene as word spread beyond the airport through various communication channels, creating the potential for national attention and scrutiny that could damage the airport's reputation and create serious problems for everyone involved, in the discriminatory treatment of a decorated war veteran. Airport General Manager David Richardson, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s who had spent years dealing with complex situations and managing public relations challenges, arrived at the scene with his security chief and legal counsel to assess the rapidly deteriorating situation that threatened to become a major public relations disaster for the airport and potentially create serious legal problems for the security department. "What exactly is happening here?" he demanded with obvious concern and growing frustration as he surveyed the large crowd of military personnel who had gathered to support their embattled colleague against what they perceived as unjust treatment from airport security officers who should have known better. Officer Williams attempted to justify her actions by explaining their security concerns and procedures, but her explanation sounded increasingly weak and discriminatory as more details emerged about Marcus's distinguished service record and the obvious respect he commanded from fellow military personnel who knew him personally and professionally. "We were just following standard security protocols," she said defensively, though her voice lacked conviction as she realized how poorly her explanation was being received by everyone present at the scene. "We had concerns about the legitimacy of his uniform and needed to verify his credentials according to our established procedures for handling suspicious activity." Richardson examined Marcus's military identification and retirement orders with the careful attention of someone who understood the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of mishandling a distinguished military officer's travel experience. "Colonel Thompson," he said with obvious respect and genuine remorse for the treatment Marcus had received, "I want to personally apologize for this completely inappropriate and unacceptable treatment you've experienced at our facility. This is not reflective of our values or our commitment to honoring the service and sacrifice of our military personnel." The crowd of military supporters watched carefully as Richardson addressed Marcus with the proper respect and courtesy that should have been shown from the beginning, though their anger toward the security officers remained palpable and justified given the obvious discrimination that had been displayed. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson stepped forward to add her professional assessment of the situation and its implications for military-civilian relations and public trust in airport security procedures. "General Manager Richardson," she said with military precision and authority, "what we've witnessed here today represents a fundamental failure of training, leadership, and basic human decency that needs to be addressed immediately and comprehensively to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future." As news of the confrontation continued spreading through military networks and social media platforms, the number of service members gathering at the scene grew to unprecedented levels that airport management had never witnessed in their facility's history. More than 100 active duty personnel, veterans, and retired military officers had assembled to show their support and respect for Marcus, creating a powerful display of military solidarity that demonstrated the deep bonds forged through shared service and mutual respect among those who had dedicated their lives to protecting American freedom and democratic values. General Patricia Hayes, a recently retired Air Force three-star general who had been traveling through Denver on personal business, arrived at the scene after being contacted by her former colleagues who knew of her professional relationship with Marcus and his outstanding service record throughout his distinguished career. "Colonel Thompson," she said with obvious pride and deep respect as she approached through the crowd of supporters, "it's an honor to see you again, even under these unfortunate circumstances that should never have occurred in the first place." Her presence immediately elevated the significance of the situation as other military personnel recognized her rank and understood that Marcus commanded respect at the highest levels of military leadership and command structure. "This officer," General Hayes announced to the assembled crowd and airport management personnel, "commanded the largest air operation in Operation Enduring Freedom led over 5,000 airmen in combat operations, and received the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire that saved hundreds of coalition lives during some of the most dangerous and challenging missions of the entire war. The security officers who had initiated the confrontation watched with growing horror as they realized the magnitude of their mistake and the distinguished nature of the officer they had so disrespectfully treated, based solely on their prejudiced assumptions and limited understanding of military service and sacrifice. Airport passengers who had initially been curious about the commotion now stood in respectful silence as they began to understand the true nature of what was happening before their eyes and the injustice that had been perpetrated against a genuine American hero who deserved far better treatment than what he had received. Social media posts about the incident were already going viral as passengers and military personnel shared videos and photographs of the unprecedented display of respect and solidarity for Marcus, creating potential for national attention and scrutiny that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved in the discriminatory treatment. General Hayes stepped back and called the assembled military personnel to attention with the commanding voice and unmistakable authority that had led American forces through some of the most challenging military operations in recent history. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with pride and respect that resonated throughout the terminal area, "I present to you Colonel Marcus Thompson, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, and over 30 other decorations for exceptional service to our nation during 30 years of distinguished military leadership in peacetime and combat operations around the world." The moment she finished speaking, every single military person present immediately snapped to attention and rendered the most crisp, precise, and respectful salute that Denver International Airport had ever witnessed in its history. Over 200 active duty service members, veterans, and retired officers stood in perfect formation with their right hands raised in salute to honor a fellow warrior who had earned their ultimate respect through decades of exceptional service, courage, and leadership that exemplified the highest ideals of military service and personal sacrifice for the greater good. The salute continued for a full minute in complete silence, except for the sound of respectful breathing and the subtle movement of uniforms as these dedicated men and women paid tribute to someone who represented the very best of American military tradition and values. Airport passengers, employees, and management personnel watched in awe as they witnessed this unprecedented display of military respect and solidarity that demonstrated the deep bonds forged through shared service and mutual dedication to protecting the freedoms that all Americans enjoyed every day. Marcus stood at attention and returned the salute with the same precision and respect he had maintained throughout his 30-year career, though tears of pride and gratitude were visible in his eyes as he experienced this overwhelming demonstration of support from his fellow service members who understood the true measure of his character and contributions to their shared mission. This is why truth always comes to light, and justice always finds its way. If this story shows you that dignity and respect matter more than assumptions, make sure you subscribe to see more stories where justice prevails. Because when we stand together against discrimination, we make real change happen. Following the unprecedented display of military respect and the undeniable proof of Marcus's distinguished service record, Airport General Manager Richardson immediately initiated comprehensive reforms to airport security protocols, training programs, and discrimination prevention procedures that would ensure no military personnel would ever again face such disrespectful treatment at their facility. Bradley Morrison and 2 other security officers involved in the discriminatory treatment were immediately suspended pending a full investigation, while Officer Williams faced disciplinary action and mandatory sensitivity training that would determine her future employment with the airport security department. New training programs were implemented requiring all security personnel to receive education about military customs, traditions, and proper protocols for interacting with service members traveling through the facility, ensuring that future encounters would be handled with appropriate respect and professional courtesy that honored their service and sacrifice. Marcus was personally escorted to his gate by General Hayes and an honor guard of 20 military personnel who ensured that his journey to Washington, D.C. for his retirement ceremony would proceed with the dignity and respect he had earned through 3 decades of exceptional service to his country and its democratic values. The incident became a catalyst for nationwide discussions about discrimination against military personnel and the importance of proper training for civilian security personnel who interact with service members in airports, government facilities, and other public spaces where respect and understanding should be guaranteed rather than optional. Within weeks, the video footage of the unprecedented salute had been viewed millions of times across social media platforms, inspiring countless Americans to express their gratitude for military service and their commitment to ensuring that all service members receive the respect and honor they have earned through their dedication and sacrifice. Marcus's retirement ceremony at the Pentagon became a celebration not only of his individual achievements, but also of the broader principle that truth, dignity, and justice will always prevail over ignorance, prejudice, and discrimination when good people stand together and demand better treatment for those who have served their country with honor. The young Army sergeant who had first recognized Marcus's decorations later said that witnessing the salute was the most inspiring moment of his military career, demonstrating how respect for service transcends rank, branch, and individual differences when military personnel unite to honor their shared values and commitment to excellence. Airport security departments across the nation implemented similar training programs and protocols to prevent future incidents of discrimination against military personnel, ensuring that the lessons learned from Marcus's experience would benefit countless service members traveling throughout the country on official and personal business. The transformation that began with one man's dignity in the face of discrimination ultimately improved the travel experience for thousands of military personnel and created lasting change that honored the service and sacrifice of all who wear the uniform of the United States military with pride and distinction. But Colonel Thompson's story is just one example of how truth always comes to light in the aviation industry. Next video. Watch what happens when a young black woman's 15-year aviation secret is revealed during a cockpit tour. When 300 passengers witness someone questioning her right to be there, the most inspiring moment in commercial aviation unfolds. You won't believe what happens when she takes command. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and turn on notifications for new content. Don't forget to hit the like button if this story moved you, and share your thoughts and opinions about this situation in the comments below.